I think that we should talk a little bit also about the hidden costs. So the first question would be, how do we quantify and articulate the hidden cost to the average citizen when political slogans like friendshoring and reshoring override the market logic of comparative advantage? The question goes to everyone. Mitja, if I may ask you to start.
One. So how did you pick up me to begin with?
Sorry?
Okay, so yeah. So thanks for coming to this wonderful event. Thanks to the organizers for making it possible in the first place. So yeah, actually this is a tough question, and my remark was how have you chosen me to start with this hard question?
Because I trust you.
Trust that's a good way of putting it, actually, because trust is essential when it comes to being able to communicate things, right? So when it comes to invisible costs, I mean, it's like being an economist by profession. I tend to actually be focused on what's invisible rather than what's visible and measurable. In particular, since economics as a science has actually grown into something that could be called abstract mathematical equation making or something like that, and computing mathematical solutions, which are of course designed by these equations, and then all this translates into political measures that actually are really biased when it comes to the capacity to capture something that's invisible. So, because math, of course, is a beautiful language, but it's actually essentially dependent on the quality of measurement. So, and well, economic affairs are something that are actually, or is the activity that's taking place actually on the micro between the people. I mean, it's the most of the activity is not measurable. So. And one of my, let's say, motivations for the next period of my academic work is to try to persuade academic community to start, to realize in the first place, and then to start, let's say, putting more of the emphasis into human dimension of economic affairs. So to move from the so-called complex system paradigm, which is the math-based paradigm, which understands human economic behavior as if we are robots that are just automatically doing something that's measurable, into something that's called the humanomics, actually something that Vernon Smith actually named humanomics. That's basically based on the interaction between people. That's what actually Adam Smith, as a founder of economics as a science, put it into the birth of the science, because he is, I'm sure you know, initially wrote the book about human sentiments, and then after that he started seeing through economic exchange and trying to understand what's going on. So my answer to your question would actually, Martin, would be, yes, folks, let's look first into what are the assumptions, what are the fundamental pillars on which economics as a science is being actually built. Why? Because politicians, of course, they are not making these decisions on their own. They are surrounded with all sorts of economic experts of all the specializations within the economics, basically grounded on this let's say empiricism, which is actually current state of the art in economics and science. So my answer would be, we have to change the perspective first into how we see economic affairs, try to find the ways, really good ways of communicating that to the public, so that the public will actually realize that economics is not something artificial that's going on in some academic world, or within the especially knowledgeable people that understand how it's working, and let's rely on their advice. No, economics is something that we all do every day, basically, and the results are really hard to, the activity is really hard to measure. Let's turn it into something that's closer to where economics actually how it actually proceeds, or how it's actually implemented on a day-to-day basis through the lens of what Vernon Smith, very famous Nobel laureate in economic science, calls humanomics. That would be my answer. I hope it was kind of understandable.
Yeah, so reshoring or friendshoring, these are very nice slogans. Politicians like them for sure. But it's one thing that if I'm as an entrepreneur, I decide, let's say, okay, I move my factory from China to, let's say, Romania. Okay, I will pay a bit more for labor. Okay, it will be a bit more for taxes. Fine. But in my calculation, it makes sense, yeah? So I'm sure that it will arrive on time, and it will be delivered. But if you force them, so by political push, that's not okay, yeah? So something like, of course, politicians have nice ideas in mind, but it's never a good incentive. Meaning that at the end of the day, what do you have? Average family will have less goods for a higher price. And this means that, of course, the rich will always make it in the end, but the poorest will pay. Yeah, so the poorest will be hit. On average, let's say that it's already calculated that in the US for protectionism, average family has to pay per year $1,200 till $1,700 more. And this is always something like, okay, the family will have less money for less products. So this will be the simple consequence of it. So once it is forced, it's never a good idea.
Well, I think that the title of this session is very well chosen. We are witnessing a geopolitical tectonic shift. We see that the left has lost their dreamlands, the Soviet Union, China, Cuba, and so on, and now they resort to global warming and Palestine. That's basically the new dreamland of the left. And the left has shrunk into oblivion. The right, however, is split. We have in Europe, in the three largest countries in Europe, we have the Alliance for Deutschland, Alternative for Deutschland, and we have the Marine Le Pen, and we have the Nigel Farage parties. And it seems that those parties are gaining ground, and we have protectionism on the rise in the United States. That leads me to the question, what did we do wrong? And I think I have an answer. We fought for the four freedoms. The freedom of the free movement of capital, goods, services, and people over borders. But what happened was that we didn't realize what Hayek, whose institute is sponsoring this, wrote in the Times in 1978, and he really anticipated what's now going on. He said, while I look forward as an ultimate ideal to a state of affairs in which national boundaries cease to be obstacles to the free movement of men, I believe that within any period with which we can now be concerned, any attempt to realize it would lead to a revival of strong nationalist sentiments. This is precisely what we've seen. By having borders totally open, we have created a situation in which all kinds of hostility to minorities have arisen and so on. And this is of course because some of the people that are crossing our borders, they do not accept our values. And they are essentially creating conditions for a civil war in Europe. But what is also very concerning because of the conference that we are now having here, and with the book launched, this very interesting book, is The Rise of Protectionism. Because we've presented the four freedoms as one package, instead of presenting it as a package of three with the one optional one being the free movement of people, they are rejecting not only the free movement of people, but also free trade. This is the problem that we are faced with today. So I think we have to be quite concerned about what is happening in the world, and that we have to do something about free borders. The borders should be open to honest, hard-working people who are trying to better the conditions, but they should be closed to criminal gangs and to religious zealots that want to impose their values on us, and also to people who are only seeking welfare benefits. And that brings me to a second point, not only the first one, but also the free borders are not really compatible with the welfare state, with generous welfare benefits. So this is my observation on the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I do think the fundamental problem is, for me, the welfare state within a democratic system. So the cost of these processes are hidden because people are distracted by other things. So we imagine a world where people are fully engaged with a democracy as maybe we might be, and we might discuss these things, but the normal citizen is interested in other things. So they let things go on around them until it's too late. And I think we're in that situation now that where the welfare state has created these sort of imbalances. We talked earlier in the previous session, talked about the mounting debt. Well, of course, part of that is central bank policies that are promiscuous, supporting venal politicians who are buying votes through making promises to redistribute what you might have produced. So we're really in a bad moment in that sense, and we're trapped by the welfare state. We don't see a retreat, except in maybe a place like Argentina, where there's a concerted effort where Javier Milei sees this as a fundamental problem, shrinking the state, reducing expenditures. The solution in the West is, for most countries, to raise spending, not to cut spending, not to cut debt. The idea that 70% of GDP going to debt is in a sense irrelevant, because Greece had about 60% in this economy went into crisis. The Japanese have over 300%. The problem is, what they've done is that they've leaned on taxpayers to bail them out. So the Japanese have Toyota, they have other, and the Greeks didn't. The Greeks had Fettuccine. Doesn't generate much in tax revenues. We've got to resist attempts by politicians to impose more taxes and higher tax rates. So I guess that's...
Okay. Let me pick up on a term you mentioned, Hannes, civil war. Well, difficult topic. Let's ask ourselves what we can do to avoid a civil war. Should we rely on digital IDs, for example, or what can we do to really get out of the really difficult situation we're in right now?
Well, I've thought a lot about this. What can we do? Because we can't just have meetings and talk about how things are getting worse. We have to find some escape routes. And I think that one of them might be to make a distinction between good and bad populism. A lot of classical liberals, they hate populism. But there is good populism and there is bad populism. The bad populism is, of course, when you create an enemy, like Hitler did with the Jews, and like the left-wing people do with the rich. That's bad populism. But good populism is to identify the interests of people and enable them to have a voice. And this is what Thatcher and Reagan did. They were certainly populists, both Reagan and Thatcher, but in a good sense. And Reagan was also an idealist. An acquaintance of mine, Lee Edwards, whom some of you may know, he wrote the biographies of both Reagan and others. He told me that he was once visiting Reagan when Reagan was the governor of California. And Reagan went to the kitchen to make drinks, and he was browsing in books in his library meanwhile. And he saw a book by Bastiat. And he saw that the book had been closely read and underlined and so on. And then Lee Edwards said, I knew that Reagan was an eloquent speaker, but perhaps he could be the next president of the United States, because he has learned his Bastiat, the great popularizer of free trade. And Thatcher, of course, by selling the housing and making Britain into a share-owning democracy, she did her right. So I think we have to be populists. We have to be good populists. But this means that we have to convince the right, which is now split between the free market people and the anti-free market people, to stay with the free market, and to explain to the conservatives that the greatest enemy of conservative values like the family is the state, this welfare state that subsidizes irrational behavior. So this is This is one thing we have to do. Another thing is we have to reform the European Union. Now I am actually from a country that is not in the European Union, so I see it as an outsider. The European Union is there to stay. We can't just curse it. You know, they say don't curse the darkness. Light a candle. And there are a lot of reforms that you can do in the European Union. For example, you can take away the legislative power from the Commission and turn it back to the national parliaments and some of it to the European Parliament. You can impose penalties on the European Central Bank if they break their rules, as they have done. They have broken their rules. It's clear in the rules of the European Central Bank they're not allowed to lend to governments, but they have done so, and the European Court has confirmed it. And why is that? That's because the European Court is consisting of Euro enthusiasts. They are basically people who have specialized in European affairs and universities and so on. Instead, the European Court should be split into two. One of them would be a subsidiarity court that would only rule on the subsidiarity principle, which has been forgotten in Europe, and the other one could do all the other functions. And then the judges should be chosen from experienced judges, not from Euro enthusiasts. And there are several other such reforms, I believe, that you could make in the European Union. So I say, close the borders to criminals, zealots, and lazy people who just want to have benefits, and reform the European Union, and enlist the parties of the right in the good kind of populism.
I'll maybe add to it.
Sure.
I would say maybe what I said already to Martin, because as Paul, all Polish people generally laugh with Germans, so we have to, because you say about the right incentives, because a lot of Western countries made the problems with immigrants themselves. So for instance, if you take an example of Ukraine war, we have massive wave of refugees, right? Both in Poland and in Germany. In Poland, according to official statistics, 67% of them work. Because if you don't work, you die from hunger. Unofficially, it is more than 80%, so basically anyone who is able to work. In Germany, it is hardly 30%. Why? Because they have so many social benefits that they are discouraged from work. So very often social benefits are higher than minimum wage. So of course these are the same people, but if you don't have any incentive to work, you won't work. So that's why, this is very, very simple mechanism. Eliminate that.
So yeah, it's actually astonishing to me that in a period of hyper technological progress, we are talking about where we can actually just leave the society to be run by robots. I mean, to thinking about the need to explain people such essential or basic, let's say, basic things such as, okay, the trade makes us all better, it's better to trade than to fight, okay, let's say the innovators should be as enabled, or I mean, it's like should be allowed to do their innovations in a society that encourages knowledge, new technological products and so forth. And yet we have to speak about how to avoid civil war. I mean, it's like as if we were like speaking of the prehistoric civilization where none of this was actually, where none of these technologies were available, where there was basically societies living within their own local communities, and in which every single intrusion or let's say communication with other tribes was seen as an intrusion. So I mean, that's a part of the answer. I see here, or let's say the need for this eternal discussions about that are related to what we have done with the rise of the bureaucratic apparatus, with the rise of the power of the state. That's where basically all the scenes of the need to actually fight against or the need to fight for peace actually are, because the war has been, and in the last couple of decades, in particular in the regions where I come from, are testifying in favor of this let's say, I mean, are testifying for this need to actually fight against the strong power of the government, which, because the governments are creating wars, it's not the people on the local community that would be so powerful that they would be able to enable such thing as a civil riot or conflict. There can be trigger events, that's true, but these trigger events are then such as, for instance, let's say the violence between gangs and so forth, where someone innocent dies and it gets spread around social media, and this then triggers negative emotions with the people. And yet, where the negative emotions of people are still not enough actually to trigger a civil war. What else is needed? What's needed is actually a central force of power that can actually build, or that can actually invest into using these sentiments against or to promote their own agenda, which can be the agenda of political control. And that's where actually the root of the war is nowadays. Even though we have all the knowledge available, all the information, the theories have been built, social sciences have evolved dramatically, we all know basically that it's much better to live in a peaceful society, in a society of cooperation, in a society with limited number of regulations and rules, and yet we are going the path into extreme bureaucratization of our lives and into a centrally let's say, guided societies that are actually able to actually promote violence between the nations, because they are part of the political programs. They are actually living of that. So my answer would be: we have to be a strong voice against the central power of the government, and on all possible fronts. And they're basically, by doing that, we will then be able to sort of keep governments, let's say, away from misusing the power or actually be able to trigger civil war. Yeah, that is my kind of suggestion.
I would agree that, I mean, we do need reform. But the problem is, the institutions that we want to reform have to reform themselves. We're not going to do it. They have no incentive to reform. They have an incentive to make things worse. So we have to find another way. I mean, there are other ways. There's secession, Brexit, for example. That's pretty desperate. Blockchain technology. So it may well be that we're not going to have big answers, but individually we may find a means of escape. And that may be the best we can hope for. I'm not optimistic that I know some of I used to know people in the Court of Justice in Luxembourg. They're not going to say, well, look, yeah, we've got it wrong so far. Let's get rid of the Euro enthusiasts. They're not going to do that. I mean, it's up to them to reform. And the expectation that citizens will rise up and demand this is a bit too far. I mean, it's a bit too much to expect. So I've read too much public choice literature, and it's made me a bit pessimistic about how we're going to get from here to there.
Can I just make an intervention?
Sure.
Because this is telling you that I had a conversation with James Buchanan at his home in the spring of 1983 about precisely this. How can we get from there to there? And I actually pointed out that Thatcher and Reagan, they made a difference. They made a difference, both of them. And I said, is this then true that the public choice analysis doesn't really explain how you can get there? Do we need a hero on a white horse? That's the question asked Buchanan. And he gave a very interesting answer. It is, perhaps Thatcher and Reagan were not heroes on white horses. They were successful political entrepreneurs who realized that the time had run out for the outdated Keynesian model. And it may also be that the hope now will be that the left will lose the culture war with wokeism cancel culture, and so on. Because amongst the young people, I can detect a movement to the right. But then that movement has to be channeled in the correct destinies towards the free market and towards decentralization and to respecting the subsidiarity principle. And I think that should be the task of free market intellectuals, to talk to the right, to talk to the young people and tell them you can best accomplish your goals by the free market, by the free cooperation of individuals.
Very, very interesting arguments. Let me direct the discussion in a little bit of a different direction. We also have innovation in the title, and my question now is, we see the argument of national security raised a lot now and justify things like trade tariffs, like content moderation, things like that, which also implies more regulation, of course. So this seems to me to be a very bad recipe for more innovation in Europe. How can we have similar amounts of innovation or even more innovation than China or the US even? What could be recipes there? And what's your attitude towards these national security arguments?
If I may, Martin. So yeah, it's we are actually going back into the roots again, to what has already been written in the great books of economic thought, and that is the acknowledgement of the role of the entrepreneur in a society, which is actually at the core of welfare, of the projects that have been put in place and made available for our use. And that again boils down back to the change into a narrative, to the need to change a narrative in this extreme direction in which economics as a field has actually been currently, and of course the answer to that is not so straightforward in a way, because we are in a situation in which we are, so we need, as Hannes and Cris, we need to find a way how to come from here to here. We know what's the end result, or at least we kind of have an idea in which type of a society we would like to live. We are kind of in a circumstances where basically the dictation of where the tempo or the dynamics of economic creation is basically being very, very sort of say navigated by central command, basically. That is corporations involved with close ties with politicians. They are navigating our landscape, economic landscape. Of course, preventing innovation, because this becomes kind of a self-incentivized cycle of these arrangements they have. Yes, we should break these ties somehow. But how to do that is a really intriguing challenge. By small steps, by having discussions like this one, by having open discussions about the need for deregulation and about the need to actually move incentives from the state into the hands of the people themselves at the level of, as Hannes also mentioned, to respect the principle of subsidiarity, also when it comes to entrepreneurship. So it's basically nothing more to add here, actually, Martin. At least I don't see what would be the ultimate solution to this challenge. I mean, how to come from point A to point B. But having at least good mindset that's friendly towards those who are able to create something better, something new, is a good first step, actually, to change the mindset, to change the narrative again into how we view economic affairs. It's not something it's not a system. Economics is not a system, because system is something that you can see, that's invented, that it works according to some sort of principles of the system. It's an idea, actually, more than a system. So, and we should have a sort of more like friendly view of that when it comes to the creation of value, on which we all depend. Yeah.
From the Polish perspective, I can say that we have so many agencies in Poland that promotes innovation. They support innovations. They give you grants, they give you subsidies to make something innovative. But guess what? They give it to a friend of a friend to a friend, and then once, of course, a lot of money on the expense of taxpayer. And once the project is finished, of course, the company closes, and that's the end of the innovation. So not a single innovation was ever ordered by the government. It doesn't happen this way. At the Warsaw Enterprise Institute, by the way, we have published nice book of Marta Roels, who says like how innovation works and why they flourish in freedom. So we need freedom, and more freedom, and deregulation for sure. So I would also give you the example, because in Poland it's always very often the argument that we have some strategic goals, and that's why we should have state-owned companies. So, for instance, till in the recent years, we had a state monopoly on post office. The Polish post office was absolutely horrible company that had procedures like from 30 years ago, everything paper, long lines, everything, horrible thing. And of course, there was the argument that this is our strategic goal. But once there was a nice new private company, now it's not only the champion in Poland, but also expanding abroad in many countries. But the history of that was that the state monopoly had the privilege, because they lobbied for the law, that up to 5 or 10 grams, I think, I don't remember exactly the number, it could be delivered only to a state-owned company. But of course, people wanted to have private company that is more reliable and more efficient. So what the company did, they started gluing kind of metal in the envelopes just to exceed that weight, just to deliver these letters, and they won. Yeah. So that's how why they hacked the system. Yeah. But this is what we need. We never top-down regulation about innovations.
Do you want to add anything?
Well, I would, as I say, I've been thinking a lot about these issues and how to do something about them. And one advice that I would give to intellectuals is don't turn your back on the right-wing parties. Don't write them off as deplorables. I think a lot of classical liberals and intellectuals who are sophisticated, who move around, who know all the right types of red wine and so on, they despise the little man. And they do not understand that if you're going to survive in politics, for example, you have to have the blue-collar vote with you. You have to have what they called in England in the old days, when I was a student there, the man on the Clapham bus, the common man, the man in the street. So I say to intellectuals, many of my friends who are intellectuals, they are very hostile to the right-wing parties that are up and coming in Europe. What I try to do, contrary to them, is to go into the meetings of those conservative parties and try to tell them, don't abolish the free market. Interestingly, Peter Kleppe, who told me yesterday that the guys with the best free market voting record in the European Parliament was the Swedish Democrats, who have been written off by everybody else as not members of polite society, not salonfähig, like the Germans say. So the first advice is be nice to the upcoming right wing and try to convert them to free market principles. The second thing I would like to say, because we're discussing innovation, is the advice, make the rich great again. By that I mean try to make it clear to everybody how interesting and good it is to have rich people. And this ties precisely in with your point. Now, if we have 1 million rich entrepreneurs, innovative people, then we have 1 million experiments, 1 million kinds of investments. But if we have just one investment fund directed by government with 10 people on the board, then the funds will go to those who are good at convincing boards about something, but not to those who are good in innovating and operating companies. So the best thing that can happen to creativity is to have a class of rich people. They also are the people who make luxury goods, articles cheap in an experimental process, And perhaps most fundamentally, the rich are the only people with the power to resist government. And so I have made this point in Iceland. I've written many articles in defense of the rich, although probably I'm not one of the rich, but I think they have an extremely important role in society, and we have to give them a good reputation. We have to make the rich great again.
Well, we're losing that battle, unfortunately. The demonization of the 1% has become a clarion call of the left, and they've been very, of course, with the acquiescence of the mainstream media, they portray the rich as selfish and making us poor by making themselves rich. We've lost sight of the role and the important role of the entrepreneur in a dynamic market economy. And I don't know how we recapture that sort of the attention of the people, because again, Tesla is a failing company in a sense, because people are going against Elon Musk's association with Donald Trump. And that is a reaction, like I say, it's demonization of Elon Musk. He used to be a hero, now he's a villain. So we need to recapture somehow, or to re-educate the population that we will not have a dynamic economy, society, culture, if we demonize the entrepreneur. Regulation and taxation are the enemy of entrepreneurs and innovation, and we need to somehow communicate that better.
I will open up for questions soon. Just one question before that. Do you see any relation between all the geopolitical shifts going on right now and the left losing the culture war? Are there any relations, or what do you think?
We are far from that. Left losing the culture war.
I think actually that we have seen a total shift of political opinions. I was brought up in the Cold War, and then after that in the triumph of classical liberalism under Reagan and Thatcher. But now we have a totally different narrative thrust upon us, and who is the prophet of the left now? It is not Lenin. It is Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci. Because Antonio Gramsci, in his prison cell in Italy in the 1920s, he said that the left should try to gain intellectual hegemony. And they have gained intellectual hegemony. They control the universities and they control the media and all of these institutions. What can we do about it? Well, they can do two things. We actually have a prophet that can encompass both the conservatives and the classical liberals, and his name is Friedrich Hayek. Because Hayek combined conservative insights and classical liberal ideas. And what we can do is to try to recapture the universities and the media, but we can also have alternative universities. The free market think tanks in Europe and America, they are alternative universities. For example, employing people that cannot get, because of their opinions, jobs at the regular universities. And we can have alternative media, like we have the podcasts. In my country, for example, the official media is more or less populated by left-wingers, but the podcasts are young right-wing males, more or less. So all hope is not out at all. I think we can use Hayek against Gramsci.
I think what also speaks to that, there's a growing gender gap in the youth, so that especially the males are going more and more in the right direction, the right-wing direction, while the females are also trending a little bit in that direction, but less. So, yeah. Okay, let's start with questions.
So I think it's a very interesting debate. I have to say in the last 2-3 years we had in our business organization never so much discussion about geopolitical issues. First, it is destruction of the WTO, because rules are fundamental there, also to keep the smaller countries into the free market, that is all our interest. Second, migration, of course, the positive and negative effects. Because of war, with pulling effects and so on, makes unstable political systems, what is, of course, a huge issue. Then the threat of intellectual property and investment. This is everywhere going on. Are you investing in China? Is one of the things. Are you sure you have to keep your factory there? Can you keep your intellectual property there? Now we're starting also with America. Many of our companies say we have to invest or we don't want to invest because the environment is not stable. Because companies want to have certainty to invest. They want security to invest. They want less bureaucracy, like you say, but also the rule of law, and not short-noted. And I think what is also coming up is the revival of systems, cybersecurity attacks. We have to invest so much money now in this. We have to invest protection infrastructure, threatened by Russians. These are all costs they never had. And in Africa, Chinese mercenaries are there, Chinese are there, Russians are there, and we are really put out of the markets. Europeans especially, because we want to make only business there, the others make politics there. And I think this is always a contradiction. It is really threatening the freedom of entrepreneurship because everything becomes more political, more aggressive, and more militarized. And I think what we can do there, and I think it's starting also with the WTO. It was the greatest success of the United States to impose this world order, to grow and prosperity. And now we scribbling, we're destroying it at the moment. Well, what we can do there?
Do you want to answer?
You really made actually a great compilation of what's been discussed and needed actually. So we have to learn from the past. History is a great teacher, or should be at least. That's what I'm trying to say to my students all the time. That's one thing, but perhaps not to avoid the mistakes that they've done, because sometimes we learn from our own mistakes better. But in order to get perhaps a better idea, or at least to challenge ourselves in what society we would like to live. Is it a society that's grounded in let's say, militarized environment, without security, without property rights, without the protection of individual freedoms and so forth, or is it any other kind of society? You brilliantly elaborated what's needed, and your practice is what you have to deal with in a company. So I can only agree with that. But we should basically stick together. We should, in a way that this is intellectual bonding that we need to do with respect to the ordinary people, citizens as well, basically with the focus on them primarily, because they are the ones who are then ultimately producing value. But once the innovation is being put in operation, it's them who are actually producing value. So they have to be at the core in some way of our let's say, belief system that is respectful towards individual freedom. And liberties, that's perhaps my take on your.
You know, it's
very nice overview.
It's been turned upside down. The Chinese are exporting capital to these countries. We are importing their people. China's not importing asylum seekers or refugees, but we are. So we believe that that's the way for the rest of the world to engage us. And the Chinese say, no, we're going to go in and create an indebtedness. We're going to loan them money. They're going to become dependent on us. And this is what's happening. So meanwhile, we're destroying our industrial base through taxation, regulation, and the welfare state being overburdened by asylum seekers and refugees. Have been pursuing the wrong policy. The exact opposite of what the Chinese have done.
Okay. I have a very simple question, but I think it's really the most complicated question. It's a question of education, so entrepreneurship. If you look now to Germany, majority of young people want to be employed. nobody wants to become an employer. So, but who should hire them if they all want only to be employed? So that's a very simple question. The education. So tax the rich, and if tax people is rich would contribute. So that's in the media. The solution is very simple: increase taxes on rich, and all problems will be solved. And it's not. We all know it will not be the truth, but it's really, really hard to say. You have podcasts in Germany. Yeah, we have podcasts too, but. The question is how to change in the education the picture of an entrepreneur, because if the entrepreneur is always the enemy, it will not work. And second, if you have the welfare state, you mentioned the welfare state. If you, as you said, if it's easier to stay at home, you get more than to work. And in Germany, 50% only contribute 5% to the income tax. So you cannot win an election if you say we cut taxes. That's the reason why we subsidies are increasing. So
Milei did that in
Yes.
Argentina.
yeah, but how we can learn Argentina? How can we learn from these examples? So it's a simple question, but it's a really hard question.
The tragedy in this, Margaret Thatcher succeeded because Labour had made Britain unlivable. Milei succeeded because the Peronistas and the Kirchneristas made Argentina unlivable. Now, is Germany going to have to wait for that? I mean, becoming.
I will do that.
That's what Professor Sin told to me, the same as you were telling now. He said, look at the German history from the 30 years war till now. The Germans always have to be at the ground and then they stand up again. That's Professor Sin. He's an intelligent man.
It's a question of educating educators. You mentioned the people who are actually teachers, I mean, in how to actually motivate young people to be entrepreneurs. We need to find a way to educate educators, but those educators are grown up people from the academia that's been under the impact of this, again, old narrative that's based on the economics as a system that can be guided,
Yes.
if possible, by politicians, and that's actually at the core of the problem. Once we get rid of this narrative and switch towards more human economics as an idea, not as a system, then it actually we will start educating new educators that would have this respect and would then pass it over to the younger generations.
In Italy, it's even worse because not only they want to be employed by the state employed, it is said like posto fisso.
Yeah.
So most of the young people want to have a job from the government. And guess what? Actually, I met some. That's something that is absurd. So everybody wants to be like kind of state officer because it's well paid, and you cannot fire someone even if someone steals something. It's an absurd law. But also did some research, and recently, young Italians, they migrate also to Poland, to big Polish cities, because there is no job for them. They finish the universities and they have no job opportunities whatsoever. So look how it changes. So a country that used to be so rich in the past, now they immigrate to a country that used to be extremely poor.
Let's take two questions first.
Yeah. As you mentioned, the gender gap in the political electorate, so that young men tend more to the right voting and younger women still more to the left. I think why the young men or medium-aged men turn to the right when they vote, one reason might be all that wokeness and all this gender quota. So a male vice president in a British or an European company, he hasn't got a chance to get promoted if there is certain quota reserved for women. That is also a thing. It's in the supervisory boards and the management boards, it's on the universities. So men have, for the time being, they have the burden for the last hundreds of years where men had the better chances. Now they have lower chances, so this might explain some kind of the electorate game. And why younger women move now to the right, I think this is more the point of the security, with all the Afghanistan guys and who all come here. So younger women tend more to vote right because of security reasons, and younger or middle-aged men vote right more because they regard themselves now being discriminated. It's only for gender in Europe. In the USA, it's for gender and it's also for the color. So if you're a white man, this is double worse. Unfortunately, President Trump administration is going to change this. They changed it now in the US forces, and I think they will change it also in the universities and all in the corporates.
This was what the feminists call mansplaining. Now, one of the good news is that the business model, I mean, Gramsci's success is the beginning of his failure. The university business model is collapsing, partly because there are alternatives. You don't. When I was going of university age in America, you had to have a degree, at least if you wanted to advance. So there was this feeling, and now people realize you don't need it. And if you do have it, you can't find a job anyway. So it's. I think over time, and it's going to take some time. The business model will change. The Prager University, there's ways to be educated that are almost costless, other than your time. You can receive the kind of knowledge. My lectures are online. Your lectures are. People can find these things. So I'm hopeful that that sort of woke grip, the grip that the woke has on the universities in particular, will subside as the universities. I mean, this capital model, I mean, a massive amount of space that universities require, heating, electricity, and all that, it's going to go out the window. That's sooner or later.
Thank you.
I'll take your question, but just to add on there, I think it's very interesting in Silicon Valley, since about 3 or 4 years, some companies don't employ young people from universities. These are the most skilled people in the technology sector. They want, and they are saying, these people in university, they are learning crap. We don't want them anymore. We are educating them ourselves.
So 3 things actually. So funnily enough, so as a very young person, specifically about the left-right divide within the genders, I can tell myself, so I see when I interact with my mates who are also attending more right-wing nowadays, it's because the left was fundamentally built upon, they tried to find a scapegoat, which was specifically, in this case, the patriarchy, or if you want to break it down, the micro level was men, especially white men, and that's why we've got this giant split. I couldn't agree more. But specifically about re-education or education, I feel like they are being educated at university. For example, the problem is that we have is that, for example, teachers later on, they teach critical theory not like a theory. They teach it like it's a proven fact. They preach it, absolutely. They preach it instead of teach it. And that's the big problem. But how do we combat that? Because we've got that specific education. We've got these online courses. But the people are still just, I feel like nowadays in university not being taught how to critically think, critically teach later on. They're being indoctrinated in a way. And I'm saying that as a student myself. So what do you think we could do about like the re-education problem to properly do it?
Sometimes it solves itself, because at my university, at least humanities were taken by this canker of woke and all of these critical theories. But it was so much as in socialism they were imposed by Stalin theories and Boer and Mao Red Book. This was the other thing. So sometimes people were going out of the room because they said, I cannot stand this nonsense. Sometimes it solves itself.
Inshallah.
I think that we underestimate. The self-corrective features of a free society. I think people have had enough. I went to have my haircut the other day, and we were chatting. I am the barber, and he told me I have a left-wing lady friend who was in an Icelandic swimming pool. We have excellent swimming pools there, all the hot water. And she was in the showers, and next to her in the showers was a man And she complained to the people at the, the staff at the counter, and the staff at the counter said, there's nothing we can do because he defines himself as a woman. We can't do anything about it. Of course, this is nonsense. And this lady friend of his used to be left-wing. And my father said, then you can see what is the consequence of all this wokeism. Then in my small, peaceful, cultured society, we allowed once a refugee from Egypt to come because he said that he was gay, and there was such hostility towards gays in Egypt. Now what happened next was that his wife and his 4 daughters came to Iceland, and then he was beating them up because they were not learning the Quran properly, and he got a sentence. I mean, and everybody sees that this is nonsense, and they rise up against all this nonsense. So I think if we maintain freedom, of discussion, then we have some self-corrective elements, and what we should do is to stimulate those self-corrective elements.
I think it's great that we laughed now, and I only accept questions which have the potential for funny answers.